Now, we're about to start to go into what I think is the most exciting part of the Feet to Floor video series. This is the exploration of what I often refer to as the three kings. These are what I believe are the three best takedowns for the sport of jiu-jitsu. There are many takedowns out there, but these three, tomoe-nage, sumigeshi, and ukiwaza, I believe are the best adapted for the sport of jiu-jitsu. You can probably guess the reasons why I believe these three takedowns are the best adapted for the sport of jiu-jitsu. It has to do with the criteria that I offered in the previous volume of Feet to Floor. When Giancarlo and I are in front of each other, there's a wide array of different takedowns we can work with. And these will have different attributes. One of the attributes of many throws, which makes them problematic for the sport of jiu-jitsu, is the idea of back exposure. Okay, if we're working with each other in the standing position, and I commit to a throw which puts my back in front of my training partner, this can be very, very problematic in the sport of jiu-jitsu, especially in the case of variations of seoi-nage, where I land between my training partner's feet. This can be a real problem. You've exposed your back almost 100% to your opponent. And it certainly can work. It can get you takedown points, but it can also get your back taken very early on in the match and cause a lot of problems. A second form of problem, which we often run into, is neck exposure. Many forms of takedown, double legs and single legs, for example, create situations where my neck is exposed to my opponent, and he can go into various forms of counters, loop chokes, etc. So back exposure and neck exposure are really problematic. Another kind of problem we often run into is belt exposure. If I'm in front of my training partner and I come into a single leg situation, for example, my belt is exposed to Giancarlo. Now he has my sleeve in the belt, and from here he can go into very strong counters like uchimata, sotogari, all kinds of problems. Okay, so belt exposure becomes a real problem when we start working with a jacket on in the standing position. There are other forms of problems that we work with in standing situations. Back exposure, neck exposure, belt exposure are obvious ones. There's also the idea of how difficult a given move is. Any throw where I'm on one leg and hopping is going to be a difficult kind of a throw to apply in standing position for most jiu-jitsu players. It's going to have a long learning curve and might be a difficult thing for most people to apply in their early days of development. One of the beauties of the three kings, tomoe-nage, sumigeshi, and ukiwaza, is they involve the same kind of movements that many of you are familiar with when you go into full guard, okay, that movement down towards your back. And so they have a lot of overlap with movements that you're already working with. In fact, tomoe-nage is often used as a sweep down on the ground when we work, for example, from De La Riva guard. From situations like this, you guys are all very familiar with the idea of taking someone up and over with tomoe-nage as a sweep. Adapting tomoe-nage is very easy for most jiu-jitsu players. They're familiar with the idea of a guard pull, and they're familiar with tomoe-nage as a sweep. It's pretty easy for them to tie those concepts together and learn tomoe-nage in a relatively short period of time. The great thing about tomoe-nage is that even when it fails, when the throw is 100% unsuccessful, you end up in an open guard situation. That's not a bad thing at all for a jiu-jitsu player. So even in cases of catastrophic failure, there's no real penalty. Compare that with seoi-nage, where there's catastrophic failure, your opponent is on your back with two hooks in. You've just been scored on, and now you've got to dig yourself out of a very talented opponent on your back trying to strangle you. For reasons like this, I greatly favor the use of tomoe-nage. It's my earnest belief that if jiu-jitsu players spent a good amount of time working with throws like tomoe-nage, sumigeshi, etc., that they could radically transform their performance in the standing position. Another reason why I favor tomoe-nage is because it's particularly well suited to the kinds of stance and grip which you'll often see in the sport of jiu-jitsu. In the sport of judo, or even sambo, I will be penalized if I go into defensive static stances for extended periods of time. In jiu-jitsu, there's no penalty for any form of grip or stance. It's very, very rare indeed for stalling calls to be made. And so many of our opponents tend to stand in very bent over defensive jigotai or defensive crouch stances. And it's exactly in situations like this that tomoe-nage becomes extremely successful. If my opponent is bent over, many of the classical throws can be quite difficult to apply in these circumstances, as my opponent's hips and legs are so far away from me. But tomoe-nage enables me to go underneath my training partner's defensive arms and into a situation where we can easily bypass that defensive crouch and get through into a strong throwing position. So for reasons like this, I greatly, greatly favor tomoe-nage along with sumigeshi and ukiwaza as the three kings in the standing position, the best three takedowns for the sport of jiu-jitsu when we're wearing a jacket. We're going to look now in great detail at how we can get this throw working for you and increase your performance in the standing position. Now, our job is to get you throwing people confidently and successfully with tomoe-nage in the shortest possible time frame. There are three conditions that any tomoe-nage must satisfy in order to be successful. If we take a standing position, Giancarlo. The first and most important by a landslide, and if you walk away from this video with nothing else, you walk away with this. If you're going to throw someone with tomoe-nage, you have to bring their head over your head. No exceptions, okay? I'll say that again because it's extremely important. If you're going to throw people with tomoe-nage, you must be able to take their head and bring it directly over your head. Failure to do this simple prerequisite will almost always result in a failed throw. Okay. The idea is, just take a standing position. When you come in here and I lock up with my training partner, if I create a situation where I throw and his head is not over mine, he now has an ability to sink his weight onto his heels, and you are going to have to use extreme amounts of force to bring this man over, probably unsuccessfully, and the throw will fail. Contrast that with a situation where I take a hold of my training partner and I successfully bring his head over my head. Now he feels weightless, okay? We'll take that in slow motion, Chief, and I'll stop you when your head goes over my head. When I bring his head over my head, I come out to the side. That's what we're looking for. With his head directly over mine, even the smallest forces here will take him onto his tiptoes and into a position where I can throw. Contrast that in a situation where the head is not over my head, and now his weight can go onto his heels and no amount of force will bring him over. Okay? So your number one prerequisite for being successful with tomoe-nage is to bring his head directly over yours. Almost everything that we do in this tomoe-nage section of the video is designed to do exactly that. How are we going to bring his head over ours when he doesn't want that to happen? Because that's going to determine your success or your failure. That's our first prerequisite. Second one, you've got to get your opponent on his toes. If Giancarlo's weight shifts onto the heels, any form of tomoe-nage will become extremely difficult. When the weight settles on the heels, it feels impossible to move him. But if I can bring him onto his toes, the easier and the lighter he becomes to move. Okay? That can start in the feet. Most people will show a tomoe-nage beginning with an arm action that draws him onto his toes. Okay? Under combat conditions, that can be quite difficult. What usually happens in a randori or sparring situation is actually your falling body weight. I want you to pay particular attention to this leg. That's the one that has to move. I want this leg to come off the floor, and I want this foot on its toes. So the second big prerequisite, watch in slow motion now, as this leg comes off. As I fall, the foot comes into the air. Now all of Giancarlo's weight is on his right toes. Even the smallest force now, take the man through into a successful throw. So that's our second prerequisite. You've got to get your opponent's weight onto his toes. If you can bring his head over your head and put his weight onto his toes, you're going to throw a lot of people. But there's a third prerequisite for success. Do you remember from the first volume, we talked about the idea of the hollow man, the hollow body? The best time to throw with tomoe-nage is when my opponent's body hollows out. If you can create that hollow and put a foot on the hip, then you can bring weight onto the toes and you can bring his head over your head. That's the posture you want to attack with tomoe-nage. If he's got hips forward, confident stance, it's going to be very hard to throw with tomoe-nage. So a big part of what we want to do is to create a hollow body where the hips go back, the arms go forward, and as a result, we have that hollowed out body that's going to make a Tomoe-nage successful. Now I can go into the hollow. It's created a space where I can easily fall into that hollow and bring his head over my head. Okay? Almost everything we do in this video is designed to bring about these three conditions. Bring his head over your head. Create the hollow body, the hollow man, that creates a space for us to fall into and to put his weight onto his toes. If you can satisfy those three critical prerequisites, then any variation of Tomoe-nage, which we'll be looking at in this video, will almost always prove successful, or at least partially successful. At the very least, I promise you. Okay? And in a good many cases, you'll elevate your opponent, throw him flat on his back. If you can't satisfy any of those three prerequisites, you're not going to throw anyone with Tomoe-nage. It'll degenerate into a guard pole. I'll say this again. Almost everything we look at subsequent to now is just the satisfaction of those three principles, those three prerequisites. First, and arguably most importantly, I've got to bring my training partner's head over my head, regardless of the kind of Tomoe-nage we go to use. I've got to create a hollow body to attack. That's typically done first. Okay, if his body's forward, hips forward, upright, I've got to do something to address this. Okay, we've got to create situations where I get my opponent's body hollowed out. Okay, once we've got the hollow body, the next thing is to go underneath him. When I go in, my whole thing is to bring his head over my head and his weight forward onto one foot on the toes. And from here, even the tiniest forces will take our man over and create a beautiful and clean throw. If you can just remember those three prerequisites and drill them into your head, all the other things we start to do in this video will make perfect sense to you. So I'll say them again because they're so important. You must be able to get his head directly over your head. You must be able to create the hollow body, the hollow man, so that you have space to move into and get your throwing foot onto your opponent's hip. And you must be able to draw your opponent's weight onto his toes, preferably on one foot. You do those three things, and you're going to throw a lot of people with Tomoe-nage. Now, we're looking at Tomoe-nage, and we're trying to take you towards the path to mastery of this throw. It's my earnest belief that if you master this throw, it will dramatically improve your performance in the standing position in the sport of jiu-jitsu. Now, please understand right from the start that Tomoe-nage branches or forks into two main variations. These are the so-called side Tomoe-nage or Yoko Tomoe-nage and front Tomoe-nage, or the classic Tomoe-nage that you see in old movies and such from days gone by. Let's understand this. Side Tomoe-nage refers to the angle in which I go in towards my opponent. So if we have a standing opponent in front of us, he comes out and makes grips, we snap a grip off, and we work like so. If I fall across in front of my opponent, okay, here I'm going to go forwards, make strong body gene color. I go forwards and I pull out in front of him so that my body goes across in front of him. This would be an example of Yoko or side Tomoe-nage. I fall side on to my training partner. This can go in both directions. So for example, I can go back in the opposite direction. This is another example of Yoko Tomoe-nage, but going backwards instead of forwards. Again, I've fallen across sideways in front of my opponent. So I form a sideways angle to him. Okay, so I can go Yoko Tomoe-nage forwards or backwards. But the common feature to both of them is that I fall across his body, like so. Okay. This stands in contrast to classical or front Tomoe-nage, where I go right in the front door. Here, I jump in on my training partner and I throw directly straight back. You will see that I'm lined up with my training partner. Okay, so in one case, I'm directly in front. In the other case, I'm across sideways like so. Okay, this is the difference between Yoko and side Tomoe-nage and front Tomoe-nage. Now you might be asking yourself, is that an important difference? Hell yes, it is, okay? Because it completely changes your head position relative to his. Do you remember we said that the defining characteristic of a successful Tomoe-nage is that his head must be directly over mine? It is significantly easier for you to get his head over yours in the case of Yoko Tomoe-nage, the side Tomoe-nage, because his head has less distance to travel. Taking a stance here, Giancarlo's head starts off almost over mine. Even a small pull brings it into place because my head is so close to his base of support that even a minor pull brings his head over my head. Contrast that with front Tomoe-nage, where his head has a long way to go and I have to pull him forward to get him into a throwing position. In modern competition, around 90% of the successful Tomoe-nages are side Tomoe-nages, Yoko Tomoe-nage. And only around 10% are the more old-fashioned classic front Tomoe-nage. And that's for a simple mechanical reason. It's so much easier in the case of Yoko Tomoe-nage to pull your opponent's head directly over your head. So I do want to say that your primary emphasis in training should be upon Yoko Tomoe-nage. Now that's not to say you shouldn't master the old front Tomoe-nage too. There is a place for it. And I'm going to show you variations of it, which can do a very good job of bringing the head over the head, even though it is more difficult. But I'm not going to lie to you. In competition and in sparring, you're probably going to find that the vast majority of your successful Tomoe-nages are going to be the Yoko Tomoe-nage. It's just easier to do. There's a reason why most modern athletes specialize in Yoko Tomoe over the old-fashioned front Tomoe. So bear that in mind. You've got two variations of Tomoe-nage, and you must be crystal clear in your mind to distinguish between them because they are two very different kinds of throws, and you're going to need different mechanics for each. I'm going to teach the Yoko Tomoe-nage first, the side Tomoe-nage, because this is statistically by far the more important of the two, and it's the one where I expect you to have the most success in your jiu-jitsu careers. Let's start to create a strong mechanical understanding of Yoko Tomoe-nage so you can actually start throwing people in a fairly short period of time. You've probably guessed, based on what I said earlier, about what some of the critical mechanical details. The first and foremost is always going to be you have to pull your opponent's head over your head. You have to be able to create a hollowing in your opponent's posture so that you have space to put your throwing leg on your training partner's hip. And you have to be able to draw your opponent's weight onto his toes. Those are the three prerequisites. Now we're going to look at how we're actually going to do this on someone who doesn't want to be thrown. Okay? We're going to start off in the Iotsu situation where we both have the same foot forward. We're both right-handed, so I'll demonstrate it right versus right. When we come out towards each other, my favorite way when my opponent comes out to make grips, to deal with, to enter into Yoko Tomoe-nage, is to take his power hand off. Okay, he'll probably go in to grip here at the sleeve. If my opponent doesn't grip at my sleeve, there's no reason why we can't start going into all of the movements that we saw in the previous series. We would go into our training partner's legs and take down, etc., etc. Okay, so the onus is on him to start getting grips once I start getting that outside flank position. We've seen that once we get to the outside flank, it's a big advantage for us. So he will be wanting to get a hold of us and grip up like so. Now we have a situation where we both have each other's cuffs. I have his power hand under control. If he tries to put his power hand on, it's stuck. Okay, so all he can take now is a feeble sleeve grip down here. Okay, now I want to put my hand on. So from here, I usually fake for his hand. As he goes to pull his hand away from me, I take what I really wanted all along, my opponent's lapel. Now, if my opponent's an idiot and doesn't get a hold of my sleeve, then there's no reason why I can't just drag him down to the floor. A simple snap down. Okay, so for example, I could just drag him down to the mat. So the onus is on him to try and start gripping up. But you'll notice the only grip he has is on my sleeves. Whereas I, on the other hand, have a grip that controls his head through the lapel. Okay. From here, my first thing is to go out and create the hollow man. I got some good news for you. In jiu-jitsu, many of your opponents stand over in bent over stances to begin with, and you don't even have to work to get the hollow man. The vast majority of jiu-jitsu players think this is a good stance to work in, and it kind of does the work for you. I'll deal more with situations when a guy's upright later. I'll show you how to force the hollow man on a resisting opponent. Now, in situations like this, we have to bring the head over the head, his head over my head. The key to this, is your elbow off the power hand. I want to see you guys taking the elbow high as you commit to the floor. So mechanically, I want my head falling towards his foot. So I start by squaring my man up. So he's square to me, okay? If he's in a staggered stance, his forward leg will make it difficult for me to get my throwing foot in place, okay? So I want to start by squaring the man up by moving away like so. So now we're side on to our training partner. Now from here, I bring my head towards my training partner's wrist. As I do this, I fall across my training partner's body and I take my foot off the floor. As a result, I can bring my knee into my chest and I start a sitting action. My elbow pulls high. If I have a low elbow, his head doesn't come over my head. So there we are. But when my elbow pulls high, watch what happens to his head. It comes over my head. And as a result, we're in a position where we can start to throw people up and over. That high elbow pull, where I take my elbow high over my body, is the key to bringing his head over my head when we work with lapel grips. So we start off right versus right. He comes out and makes grips. We go through and snap his grip off. He's probably going to take a grip on you. Otherwise, you can get an angle on and set up all the takedowns that we saw in the previous series. From here, I want to get my hand on. If I'm naive and I just try to grab a lapel, he'll block me. So I take a hold of him, he pulls away and leaves me what I really wanted. Now I got to square him up. So I move away and pull. I bring my head down like so, and I bring my foot up. Now my whole thing is to fall across in front of his body. That creates a weight man and a beautiful throw as a result. That high elbow pull is your key to success. One of the reasons why many people fail initially with Tomoe-nage is because they poke at their opponent with their arms. They grip up and they've got stiff arms poking at their opponent. So when they fall, they actually push their opponent's head away. What I want to see you guys doing is once you get grips on your opponent, loose with your arms here. So we're nice and relaxed. So when I pull him around the mat, we're nice and relaxed with our elbow, and watch out as we sit down to the floor, we get a nice relaxing throw overhead. With that nice high elbow action, it ensures his foot goes high, his head goes directly over our head. Now, that high elbow action also has a magical effect upon your opponent's feet. The high elbow pull takes this leg off the floor. When we grip up and square the man, I want this leg coming off the mat. If I don't do a good job, he plants both feet strongly. No high elbow pull, both feet planted. When I pull high with the elbow, it takes that foot up off the mat. That's what we're looking for. I want you to watch this foot when I perform the move. We come out, square the man up. From here, as the foot comes up off the mat, you get a beautiful high amplitude elevation that leaves him hopping on one support foot. Very, very hard for him to keep his base. And as a result, we get a nice throw. Please understand that whenever you work with Tomoe-nage, you got two legs. You have your throwing leg and you have your support leg. The support leg is absolutely critical for your success. Everyone focuses on the throwing leg. That's the one that goes in your training partner's hip. So if I square my training partner up, everyone focuses on my left leg and it goes in and catches. But no one focuses on this one. This is the one that really helps. As my left leg brings him up, it's my right leg that brings him up and over and into a position to be thrown. You need to create a kind of backward somersault effect where I throw with one leg and the second foot goes over my shoulder and locks in place. So an excellent beginning drill for your Tomoe-nage is to have an imaginary opponent in front of you, get your grips and place your foot in. Then train your support leg to bring you over your shoulders and into a winning position. So There's my throw leg. Then the support leg comes up, extends, and as the leg extends, you go over the top. Your support leg will start bent, and then the act of extension will bring you up and over. As the leg extends, you end up on top. So now this time watch my right leg. As we come out, I go in and underneath, and over we go. If I only had one position to put my right foot for every Yoko Tomonagi I threw for the rest of my life, I would choose right outside my training partner's belt. Watch my right foot relative to his belt. As I come in and throw, I draw him up. My foot comes right there. I'm not putting the second foot on the hip, just close to the belt. And as I extend, that's what takes him over. You will see my foot brush my opponent's hip. So we have a throwing foot that goes in the hip and a support foot that takes me over into top position. Those are some of the key mechanical elements. The most important, I would say, is the high elbow pull that almost guarantees your opponent's head goes over your head. Secondly, is the idea of dividing your legs. You have a throwing leg and a support leg. Don't underestimate the importance of the support leg. It's important that you throw your throwing leg into a good position. We'll talk about that next. But it's the support leg that rounds your body. Please understand that when you throw, a key to Tomonagi is a rounded spine. If I fall flat on a flat back, you cannot bring your opponent's weight over you. You must fall to a rounded spine. And it's this rounded spine that enables you to back roll into the throw. Let's contrast the idea of falling onto a flat back. This is how you know a Tomonagi is going to fail. If I fall flat, I'm dooming myself to failure before we even begin. But if I round my spine, the rounded spine enables the extension of the support leg and the throw that we're looking for. Don't fall to a flat back. You must practice the rounding of your spine as you enter the move. I'm going to do the entry in slow motion and pay attention to the curvature of my spine. When we start off, and I go in on my training partner, you will notice as I take my step, my spine rounds. That's why I bring my head down and I crouch. So that as I fall, my spine is already rounded. So we can take our man over and into a perfect throw. Contrast that with falling onto a flat back, the enemy of the good Tomonagi. When I fall onto a flat back, it's completely useless. Only when my spine rounds can we create the lift and backward somersault effect that signals a successful application of Tomonagi. So make sure mechanically we have the high elbow pull. We have the idea of a rounded spine, and we have the idea of a throwing leg and a support leg. Now, another critical cue. Your opponent's power hand. I want to take his power hand and push it inwards so that when I fall, I push here. So he has no base of support. I'm essentially forcing Giancarlo into a forward roll over his shoulder. I am taking Giancarlo's hand and pushing it between his legs while I lift and create a forward roll against his will. If I don't do that, if I allow Giancarlo to extend his arm out wide, so I go into the throw and the arm's out wide, that's when they can start cartwheeling over you. That doesn't happen much at beginner level, but at World Championship level, happens all the time. okay? So it's very important that as you learn the move, you get it right first time. The idea is, pay attention to Giancarlo's hand now. Keep your eye on this hand. As I bring my man around the corner, I come up, I push the hand in. I go first, his hand goes in second. From Giancarlo's perspective, he should feel his hand being pushed under as he gets rolled on through, okay? So the main mechanical details, Yoko Tomoe Nage, right versus right, IL-2 situation. First, create the hollow body. That's the time to throw. If he's bolt upright, this is not the time for Tomoe. This is the time to start throwing people backwards, okay? Once we get the hollow body, we fall across our opponent and we bring in the idea of a high elbow pull. Then we distinguish between a throwing leg and a support leg. The support leg is what takes them in. Now I push his hand through, and as a result, we guide him over and into a perfect throw. Those are the main mechanical details that I want you focusing on in an IOTSU situation, right versus right, or left versus left, Yoko Tomoe Nage. Now, we've made an important distinction for any Yoko Tomoe Nage between our throwing leg and our support leg. Let's focus now on where we should place the foot of our throwing leg. We've got Giancarlo standing over us facing the camera. The ideal places, just giving you a penalty, just set up just a little more than that. The ideal placement of my foot is either on my opponent's far hip in certain situations, or if you step this leg back, on the near hip, okay? These are the two ideal foot placements. You will notice in both cases, my toes point out in the same direction as my training partner's belt. The more perpendicular to the belt your foot is placed, the worse your Tomoe Nage will be, and the more you will deal with the problem of slippage. Slippage is where my throw foot slips off my opponent's body and you end up pulling guard. Okay, that's not terrible, but it's not what you wanted. You wanted to throw this guy. So it's important, sit up a little straighter, come closer to me. It's important that my foot contours where my opponent's belt is. Okay, so that it fits into the natural handle of my opponent's hip. You have two choices. You can go far hip or step back. You can go near hip, okay? Now you have a choice, but I'm gonna give you what I believe is my experience with foot placement. When I fight IOTSU and we both have the same stance, I like to put my foot on the far hip. And when I fight Kenkiyotsu, opposite stance, I like to put my foot on the near hip. This is not a hard and fast rule. You're not wrong if you do the opposite of what I just told you. But in my experience, this is the easiest way for most people to throw with this Tomoe Nage throw. So I'll demonstrate this now. Giancarlo and I are both right-handed stance, okay? From here, from the right versus right situation, watch my left foot, my throwing foot, I'm gonna put it in Giancarlo's far hip right here, okay? So as I go down into the throw, there's my foot placement, okay? Now contrast that with opposite stance. Now, my opponent is further away from me, legs back, he's further away. In these situations, I like to take my throwing foot and put it in the near hip, right in here, and you get a better lift, okay? So when we have opposite stance, I normally go near hip. When we have same side stance, I normally go far hip. I'm gonna demonstrate that now. So, right versus right situation. He's right-handed, I'm right-handed. We've got a grip on each other. Now, watch my right foot go here to the far hip. And as a result, we get a nice throw. Now we go Kenkiyotsu situation. He's standing opposite. Now the hip's further away from me. In these situations, I come through and I bring the foot to the near hip. Those are my favorite ways to place the foot. Those are rules of thumb. You're not wrong per se if you go against those rules. But I find that most people get the best results for foot placement using that simple rule. Now, we identified one of the central features of a Tomoe-nage specialist is that they throw when their opponent is in a hollow body, where their body hollows out, the arms get extended, the hips go back, and there's a hollow into which the throwing foot can be placed, and you can bring their head over your head. Okay? The hollow body is the ideal target for any Tomoe-nage specialist. Pretty soon, if you start to establish a reputation as a strong thrower with Tomoe-nage, your opponents are all going to start doing the same thing. When you grip up with them, they're all going to start playing hips forward, body upright. And now Tomoe-nage is going to be very difficult. Okay, not impossible, but difficult. So it's important that we as athletes be able to create the hollow body regardless of what our opponent is doing with his stance. The easiest way for us to do this is to attack with the so-called ashiwaza, or foot techniques, to get our opponents stepping back away from the initial threat of a foot sweep, usually kouchi or kosoto, something like this. We're going to start off with our training partner. I pull him around, I square him up. As I come in, I'm going to threaten with kouchi gari and get my training partner stepping back and away. If he doesn't step back and away, there's a real threat here, okay? I should be able to create an actual threat of kouchi gari. So he has to step off my technique. If he doesn't, he'll fall, okay? So once again, right versus right situation. From here, I bring him around the corner and I start attacking kouchi gari. Now we've created what we want. I bring my head inside my training partner's arm. I have the hollow body that we're looking for now, and we end up with a nice throw. So that would be one excellent example, okay? Another great way to set this up is oji gari. Same situation, right versus right. We lock up with our training partner, and from here I create a strong threat with oji gari and get my man stepping off. That's going to create the ideal situation to come in with our legs and send the man over in the usual fashion. Okay? Simple ashiwaza attacks like that get your opponent from a confident upright stance to one where the hips go back, the arms go outwards, and the hollow body results. These are the perfect way to work. Okay? Another excellent way is by faking. One of the best fakes that we can work with is a kosoto fake, where I start with my training partner, I draw him around the corner. From here, I step around as though I were attacking with kosoto. What do you think your opponent's going to do when he sees that? Okay, he's going to feel threatened. Okay, so if I get a reputation as someone who's got a strong kosoto, I'll just do it this time. I move in on my training partner, and from here, I put the man down with kosoto several times. Pretty soon, he's going to start respecting that step around. And we'll get situations where from here, I can create the threat and he steps off. Okay? I create the threat and he steps off. Sometimes we'll double up. I'll fake forwards and backwards and get him stepping off. And now we're in the perfect position to drop underneath his arms and throw. Okay? Using fakes to the rear or using actual attacks to make our opponents step off are probably the single most effective ways to create the hollow body. This is a great way to use our feet the same way a boxer uses a jab. 9 times out of 10, when a boxer throws a jab, he's not trying to hit people per se. He's trying to set up a bigger, more powerful blow. Same thing with our feet. I'm not really serious about throwing Giancarlo with that kouchi gari. He doesn't know that. But in my mind, I'm not that serious about it. But he has to respect it. He has to react to it. And now we're in the perfect position to hit what we really wanted all along. The Yoko Tomoe-nage down to the mat. These are the ideal ways for us to create the hollow man, the hollow body. And if you can do that, you can start throwing people pretty damn quickly. We're going to spend some time looking at a specialized head position for Yoko Tomoe-nage. I want you guys to become extremely good at throwing people with this throw. Okay, I said it before, I believe there are 3 kings in the standing curriculum for the sport of jiu-jitsu, Tomoe-nage, Sumigeshi, and Ukiwaza. And I believe that almost any physically normal jiu-jitsu player can become very good at these throws in a relatively short period of time and start throwing people in competition in 1/10 the amount of time it would take you to learn the more classical, powerful forward throws of the standing position. If you're going to specialize in this throw, there's going to be times you have to make use of this specialized head position. It's not going to be all the time. Okay, I'm not saying do this every time you throw it. No, that's not my point. But there are some times where this is going to help you out a lot. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate it from a right versus right situation, because that's normally where you use it from. Right versus right, most of the time, I like to see my students strip the hand off so my opponent has no power hand. Okay, that means if he goes to throw me in this position, there's very few throws he can use. If my opponent has a power hand on, let's face this way, now he can start bringing my head forward out of position, and he can start throwing me. Okay, from here I'm going to fly, because he's got that power hand on. The minute I take away his power hand, he no longer controls my head. When he goes to turn across in front of me, it has no meaning now. But if he's connected here to my head, now when he turns across in front of me, now it has meaning and he can throw me. Okay. My biggest concern, if I'm going to call myself a Tomoe-nage expert, is that my opponent will get a hold of my body and turn his shoulders and throw me before I get my Tomoe-nage working. Okay, so we come out right versus right. He gets a grip, I get my grip. I want my Tomoe-nage, but before I can get it to go, he brings me out of balance and I get thrown. Okay, so that's my biggest fear. Every forward throw that Giancarlo uses involves his shoulder turning across my body. That's how he throws me. So when he turns the shoulders, brings me onto my toes, that's when Giancarlo becomes dangerous to me and he can throw me in a forwards direction. If I resist, now he can throw me in a backwards direction. Okay? And it all involves the turning of his shoulder across my body, either to throw me forwards, or if I resist strongly, backwards. Okay? It's that damn shoulder turn that's doing all the damage. So what a lot of Tomoe-nage specialists do is this. As they lock up, he's got his power hand on, and I can't get it off. I can't break it off. He's doing all the right things. He's got a strong grip. I can't break the grip. They take their head and they put their head in the shoulder here. So when he goes to rotate across in front of me, my head is a post in his shoulder. He goes to throw me, he can't. Because my head is placed in the shoulder, he can't rotate. If my head comes out, now he can rotate and he can throw me. Okay, so what a lot of Tomoe-nage specialists do is they come down into a crouch and they post inside the shoulder. When he goes to throw, it's difficult. Now, if he keeps his leg where it is in this naive position forward, place the leg forward, it's very easy for me to go into single leg attacks. So what a lot of them will do is they'll bring the leg back and away, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. Now I connect my head to Giancarlo's shoulder, I step, and I use my head position to draw him out of balance and go into a nice throw. Okay? So the head position shuts down his offense and connects my body to his. Look what happens to Giancarlo's legs when I fall with my head connected to his shoulder. It will pull his body out into a very, very precarious position on his toes and ensure that Giancarlo's head comes directly over my head. And what do we know? If you can bring his head over yours, you can throw him. So once again, he comes out and gets his grip. I come out, I get mine. Now, from here, we get our respective grips. I'm worried that Giancarlo will bring me forward out of bounds, like so. So I take my head and I plant it in his shoulder. When he goes to throw me now, my head position makes it difficult. Now, my head is connected to him. So where I fall, his head follows. And as a result, we end up with a nice Yoko Tomoe-nage. This head position shuts down his offense and at the same time almost ensures that your opponent's head is taken directly over yours. It takes him onto the balls of his feet, his toes, and makes throwing very, very easy. I strongly recommend you make use of this move or this concept when you're A, against a strong thrower, or B, in a static situation. Most of the time when we throw with Tomoe-nage, we like to see movement. That's the best time to hit it. But if you find yourself in a static situation, which is very common in jiu-jitsu because most guys tend to stand on very heavy feet, this is the perfect time for us to go to work. When he goes to move around, we're both heavy on each other, okay? Now all I do is I just fall out to the side. And as a result, we end up in perfect position. Using your head as a post inside your opponent's shoulder shuts down his offense and almost guarantees that in a static situation, his head will be pulled directly over your head and make your tomonages quite easy. The topic I'm about to cover is one of particular importance. I want you guys to become specialists in tomonagi. I truly believe with all my heart and all my soul that if jiu-jitsu students earnestly studied this throw and the other two, sumigeshi and ukiwaza, they could radically improve their performance in the standing position at very little cost, even against high-level opponents. I truly and fully believe this. So I want you guys getting good, and I want you getting good in a relatively short period of time. Now, if there's one key that's going to make you good at tomonagi in a hurry, it's footwork. And this is the one thing that no one ever talks about. We know already with tomonagi, we have to be able to create a momentum in our opponent that brings his head over our head and brings his weight onto his toes. Now, if you have an opponent who has no standing skills, that's really easy. Just pull with your elbows. It's easy. But the problem is you start getting good at tomonagi, and then pretty soon all your opponents are expecting it, and there's going to be some damn strong resistance. And you still have to be able to throw with it. And the key to that is to understand the footwork that makes a truly strong pull into tomonagi. What I'm about to say cuts to the very quick of what it means to be a tomonagi master. Most people sit into tomonagi. They just sit back. That will work at white belt level, but it won't work any further than that. Your opponent will just see the act of sitting and they'll pull back and you'll get stuffed every single time. Looks like this. Okay, let's say I've thrown Giancarlo a couple of times. Now he knows what tomonagi looks like. We grip up, and all I do, legs back, all I do is just sit. He yanks, and you end up like this. The head doesn't come over the head. You try to kick with your support leg, then you have to go back to butterfly guard and work from there, okay? It's not a disaster because you ended up in open guard, but you were hoping to throw the guy, right? You wanted 2 points out of that. Okay, the falling step is the first footwork pattern that you must master for tomonagi. First, what is a falling step? A falling step involves the surreptitious use of your head position relative to your feet to put greater momentum on him than he can cope with, even if he knows the move is coming. Okay? So, Giancarlo, you just stand right here, buddy. Now, Giancarlo's a strong fella. We're going to lock up our hands just like this and make a strong body, Giancarlo. What is a falling step? Okay? Right now, my head is precisely between my feet. Okay? That means that 50% of my body weight is on my left foot and 50% of my body weight is on my right foot. If I put my head over my left foot, now 75% of my body weight is over this leg and only 25% is over this leg. Now we're back to 50-50. Now it's 75-25, okay? So if Giancarlo and I are in front of each other, what I do is I put my head over one foot. I want you to pay attention to Giancarlo's body, okay? As I transfer my head, look how Giancarlo has to fight to hold me up. Do you see how he's fighting now? He's working, okay? Now, as I come down into a crouch, the weight distribution becomes even more extreme. Now 90% of my weight is on this foot. If I took my left foot off the floor, all of my weight would suddenly transfer into Giancarlo. And he gets pulled so that all his weight's on the toes and this foot here comes off the mat. Do you see what's happening here? Giancarlo is resisting me with everything. He's trying to hold me up, okay? Now Giancarlo's a strong kid. Yeah, I trust you on this, Giancarlo. Make a strong body, okay? Giancarlo, hold my body. He can hold my body easily, my whole body weight, no problem. Okay, not bad. I'm getting fat in my old age and he still held me up. Now, let's do a test. Strong. If I transfer all of my weight onto one foot, and now he tries to hold me up, he'll never do it. In one case, he knew I was trying to sag and he held me up easily. In the other, he couldn't because I employed the falling step. What is the falling step, Giancarlo? Let's come to the camera. I'm just going to hold you. Look out, buddy. Strong body. In the falling step, my weight starts evenly distributed. I put my weight over 1 foot so that all my weight goes onto or is positioned over this leg. If I take this one out now, I pull his body weight easily over me, okay? Despite his resistance, despite the fact, strong body, Giancarlo, that if I did it normally, he could hold me up all he wants, no problem, okay? Now I go falling step, position my body, put all my weight over this leg here, and now when I just take the foot away, I easily pull his body weight over me. I'm not lying to you when I say, if you can grasp the mechanical detail of the falling step, you are going to throw a whole lot of people, even when they know Tominagi is your goal. Now, that was the demonstration of the falling step. Let's look now at the practical application of it. Giancarlo, just have your back facing the camera. Right versus right situation. Square to me. Okay, from here, I take my foot to the center. I go to the pyramid position. Here, my weight is evenly distributed. I bring my head over the leg. Do you see how Giancarlo's body is struggling to hold me? Now, all I do is I just take my left foot off the floor. And as a result, we get a perfect throw. I want you to drill this a lot. Once you get this concept, you're going to find you go from being an average white belt Tominagi thrower to a very good one very quickly. So once again, this time we'll go perpendicular to the camera so you can see what's happening. Strong stance. From here, I stand in the pyramid position. My legs come down like so. Now, I put all my weight out to the side over the foot that I'm about to take away. As I take the foot away, we get the throw, okay? Now, that's the mechanical concept. Let's put this into operation. In a combative situation, as Giancarlo and I come out to face each other, from here, we control our training partner's power hand. We get our second hand on, and we square our man up. Now from here, I step to the pyramid position, and it's as though I was going to take a step out here. But what if I took that step, but I never put my foot down? Now you're starting to understand. The idea is, I take the step, and I never touch the ground with my foot. I do everything as though I was going to step, but I don't. I take the foot and put it in his hip. Just face the camera, face me right there, Giancarlo. Just here. Okay, I step to the pyramid. If I took the step and planted my foot, my weight would go into my left foot. But what if I took the step and never planted my foot? Then Giancarlo would bear 100% of my body weight in a direction that's very hard for him to withstand. Now let's understand another reason why the falling step is so important. Giancarlo facing me, strong base. Giancarlo, pulled in a forwards direction, has a base the length of his foot. So when I fall, strong body, he can hold me up. Okay, pull me off the ground. Again, pull me off the ground. When I pull to the side, Yoko Tominagi, his base is the width of his foot. 1/3 the base when I pull to the front. So that when I fall to the side, he tends to roll over the outside blade of his foot and fall very, very easily. Because his base has been cut down to 1/3 of what it was previously. Okay? Those are the mechanical details behind the falling step. I'm going to demonstrate it with my back to the camera so you can clearly see what's in operation here. Okay. From here, I step up to the pyramid position. Strong body. From here, I move everything out but don't touch the floor. And as a result, we can guide our man over and throw. The falling step is the key to becoming a strong tomoe-nage thrower. And what's going to make you effective is this, your head. Watch my head. Giancarlo's back to the camera. My head, strong body, commits to the outside. If I fall with my head this way, no pull. He can even pull me off the ground from here. Okay. The idea is I step to the pyramid position and it's as though I were taking this step. But instead of planting my left foot and carrying my body weight, I step and guide him over. And that's the key to the falling step. The single most important detail, other than the idea of head over head, which makes it possible to throw someone against resistance. If you look at almost any master of tomoe-nage, what you will see is that they are masters of the falling step. There are many variations of the falling step. We're going to look at a few very soon, but they all have that commonality. When I have my head between my feet, 50% of my weight goes on one foot, 50% goes on the other. Giancarlo, just come closer, strong. When I take my head over this foot, 75% of my weight is on this one. When I bring my body down, 90%. And now when I take my foot off the floor, it's too much for him. And it pulls him onto his toes despite his best efforts. Tomoe-nage is just that. I step, I take what appears to be a big step out to the outside, and now we throw it. Okay? That falling step is your key to beginning your path to mastery with tomoe-nage. Now, we just looked at the mechanical principle behind the falling step, which is the key to learning how to throw against strong opponents with tomoe-nage, even when they know it's your specialty, even when they know it's your intention. Now let's look at an extrapolation of this, the burst step. The idea behind the burst step is that we create a momentum in a given direction so we can throw in that direction. Here's a piece of information so important, you should have this tattooed on your eyelids. If you want to throw someone in the standing position, get them moving first, preferably in the direction of your throw. It's so important, I'm going to say that again. If you want to throw someone in a competitive situation, get them moving first, preferably in the direction of your throw. Throwing static opponents is hard work, man. It's difficult. You can do it, but it's tough. But throwing moving opponents, especially when they're moving in the direction of the throw, it's a lot easier. The idea behind the burst step is that we make a burst in a given direction, usually across in front of our opponent, and then we go into the falling step. It's usually 2 or 3 steps. I'm not asking you to run across the whole mat. That's not the idea. It's usually 1, 2, 3, go. Okay? So, what is a burst step? If we have right versus right situation, in like so, if I take a step across in front of my training partner, like so, and he doesn't move, just stays where he is, it's going to be very easy for me now to go in and attack my opponent. Okay? So he's got to react to the step. So what typically happens, if I take a burst, he'll follow across. So if I take a second step, he'll follow. And if I take another step, he'll follow. So what is he doing? He's moving in the direction to stay in front of me. If my opponent doesn't stay in front of me, and he's naive, and I burst step out here, it's going to be very easy for me to go across and throw him. So my opponent has to stay in front of me to avoid it getting flanked. So when I take a step out to the side, we create a situation where we're bursting across in front of each other. And that's exactly where we bring in the burst to the falling step. So when I take my body and I just step away from my opponent, now I never plant my foot. So I take the step I throw, and I don't plant my foot. I just go right through and throw my opponent with the tomoe-nage. So I create a burst, and then I go to a falling step. So once again, we lock up. I take my foot out, and I throw my body. Now, I don't plant my foot. If I plant my foot, I stop my own momentum. I stop the falling step. If I do that, I'll take another step. Then I don't plant my foot. I just go straight through and over. So you create a burst. Again, if my opponent doesn't follow the burst, if he's naive, and I come out to the side, I now have a flank on my training partner where I can drive him down to the mat. So it's in his interests to stay in front of me. So from here I step out. Now my foot just comes right on through, and we end up with a nice burst into a falling step that throws our opponent in the direction of movement. And I'll say it again, if you can move your opponent, it's so much easier to throw him. Even more so when you move him in the direction of the throw. Now, we're looking at footwork patterns that make tomoe-nage work against someone who's expecting a tomoe-nage attack. And this is a big part of what's going to be required on your part to become a master of tomoe-nage. Pretty soon you're going to establish a reputation as someone who's good at tomoe-nage. You're going to get a lot of resistance, okay? The walking step, kind of a funky way to throw someone. From right versus right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to square my training partner up a little. I'm just going to start walking naturally away from my opponent. He starts following me. Okay, as though I were walking across in front of him. Okay, it's like I wanted to walk away. Again, if Giancarlo was naive and he didn't move, well, there's no reason now why I couldn't hook onto his leg and start throwing. So he has to follow, he has to stay in front of me. If Giancarlo gives me an angle off that cross step, it's really easy for me to go in and throw him now, and hook on board and start going into my throws. So it's not to his advantage to let me step around like that. So when I start cross-stepping, I bring my right foot across and I just walk. He starts following me. So I'm walking, he's going kind of like a lateral motion. I'm walking like I'm walking down the street. Looks kind of weird, right? This can be used to set up a beautiful falling step. So I'm in front of my training partner, and then from here, I just start walking across. Then from here, I just put my foot up. Now, instead of planting my foot, I use a falling step. I fall with my head to the point where my foot would have landed. And as a result, we end up with a nice tomoe-nage. So it's like you get the guy walking in the direction of the throw. So right versus right, like so. From here, I put my hand on, I just start walking away from my training partner. Then in the middle of the walk, we send the man over. Okay, it's a nice simple way to create a walking step across our opponent, and it all begins with a step across. When I step across in front of my training partner, now if I take the second step and plant it, I don't have an ability to impart momentum on my opponent. So I take the step but don't plant. Then my head goes through and we end up with the throw. Okay? This cross step in front of our training partner does something to his shoulders. Watch Giancarlo's shoulders. When I step, it brings the shoulders forward. Now, from here, I take my step, my head goes over my foot as though I were going to plant and put all my weight on my left foot. But instead of putting weight on the left foot, I put on Giancarlo, with a strong body, Giancarlo. I put all my weight on him. And we take the man over. So that cross step is a very, very useful way of acting. Now, you have a choice between a single cross step versus a walking cross step. In a single cross step, I just take one step across. Then from here, we throw. But sometimes you might want to go for a walk. And I step and step and send the man over, okay? When you go for the walk, you create more momentum in the direction of the throw, but you are becoming more vulnerable to foot sweeps. If Giancarlo is crafty, and I start getting too incautious with my steps, he might go Diashi Harai and drop back. So that's the only drawback of walking for a long period of time across in front of someone. But whether you go with a single cross step or a short walk, you're going to create momentum in the direction of the throw. And if you can do that, you're going to throw a lot of people. Now, my job is to get you guys throwing people with Tominagi in the least time possible. If you could only have one grip to throw people with Tominagi for the rest of your life, I would urge you to study this one. Classic sleeve lapel. The classic sleeve lapel grip or sleeve collar grip is, without question, responsible for the vast majority of successful Tominagi throws in all weight divisions, all skill categories. I'm going to show you a bunch of other grips later on, but if you only had one grip for the rest of your life, go with this one, okay? You got a couple of choices here. My favorite choice is always to take away my opponent's power hand, like so. Now I have his power hand and I have the sleeve. So if he tries to grab me high, can't do it. All he can do is settle for my sleeve. Now I like to take his lapel, nice and high up here, okay? These two grips are the most important for throwing purposes, okay? A second grip, which you can take against strong grippers, where he sets the power hand and he's got it and I cannot break it off. Then we come further up the arm and we grip above the elbow and we lock on classic sleeve lapel, just like so. I want to make sure under these circumstances that I control my opponent's power hand, because if he draws my head forward, he can take me into a throwing position. So I want to dominate his elbow. So when he goes to draw my head forward, he can't, okay? Now I can't stay locked out here for long periods of time. I'm going to get tired. But when I feel him go to throw me, I pin the elbow inwards. If his elbow can draw up, he can start to take me out of balance and throw me, okay? So if he has connection to my lapel, I must dominate the elbow and pin it inwards. If I don't have connection, then I must dominate the hand and pin it inwards, okay? This is preferable, but sometimes you can't get it and you got to work here, okay? In the Kenkiyotsu situation, where we're opposite stance, now I have a choice between working inside under, which is very good, or outside over. Now, if I wanted to throw my training partner with a conventional forward throw, like Uchimata, Harai Goshi, or Tai Toshi, this would be a difficult thing because my opponent has the inside elbow position. So if we grip up, when I try to bring my body across, lock your arm out, bring your hand high, bend your elbow, now he's formed a frame inside my shoulder, and it's very difficult for me to turn across and get a throw to work of any kind. I'm locked out. But for the purpose of Tominagi, this won't matter because I don't need to turn for Tominagi. For a forward throw, I need to turn my shoulders. I can't turn my shoulders. He's framed inside my shoulder. But in Tominagi, all I need to do is bring my head down, make a strong frame. No matter how strong his frame, I can always bring my head across his body and down. So Tominagi is not reliant on dominant grips. Here's something for you. One of the beauties of Tominagi is that you can lose the gripping battle and still win the throwing battle. That's very important, so I'm going to say it again. One of the beauties of Tominagi is that you can lose the gripping battle and still win the throwing battle. If I wanted to throw Giancarlo with Tai Toshi and I lose the gripping battle, it's going to be damn difficult for me to throw him with Tai Toshi. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's going to be difficult. He frames inside my shoulder. I can't get my turns on it, and I'm locked out. Now he goes to turn me, and it's easy, okay? Because he has the inside position. But Tominagi, all I have to do is fall across his body. So even when he locks out a frame, it's still easy for me to go through, okay? So once again, With the beauty of Tomoe-nage is that I can lose a gripping battle and still win a throwing battle. Okay, that's one of the reasons why I favor it so much. You go up against a strong, highly competent, highly knowledgeable gripper, you can still get it to work, as opposed to, say, Tai-Toshi, where it becomes very difficult. Now, we have a choice, as I said, with the Kenkyotsu situation. He's opposite stance. He comes out, makes his grip. I can go inside under, or I can go outside over. Doesn't really matter. But one thing does matter. He gets his grip. I prefer to have the under grip on this side. I do prefer that. It's not essential, but I do. It's my preference. You can, he grips, he takes the under grip. You can hit it with a 4-finger grip, but it's less controlling. I generally prefer to go under and lock out, so we take all the slack out of our training partner's sleeve cuff. And this gives me a better ability to push the arm across, so that when I fall into the throw, you'll see I have an easy time assisting through with my pushing hand. Okay, so coming up to the camera now. Opposite stance, Tomoe-nage, I have the choice of inside under or outside over. But here, I generally prefer to go under and lock, so that I can take all the slack out of my training partner's cuff. And that will create a good ability to push the hand across the body, so that I can create a forward roll effect when I fall underneath my opponent. Okay? And that is the basic grip for Tomoe-nage. So, when it's time for us to learn our Tomoe-nage, spend most of your time working with sleeve lapel grips, whether it's Aiotsu or Kenkyotsu, opposite stance or same side stance. So when we practice our drills, we come out towards our training partner, he gets his grips. Our number one grip is to snap his grip off and work like so. Here you have sleeve lapel with his power hand taken off. If I can't take a power hand off, then I'll dominate at the elbow and we'll work from here, and we can still throw. If it's Kenkyotsu situation, I have the choice between inside under or outside over. Then from here, we get the opposite lapel and we're ready to play. Okay? When he goes to pull away from me now, we have an excellent opportunity to go to work. I can put a lot of weight on my training partner, create a good turn underneath the man, lift, and send the man through. That's going to be the grip, which is probably going to be responsible for around 90% of your successful Tomoe-nage throws. I'm going to show you a lot of grips today, but that's the one I want you to particularly fixate upon. That's going to be the one that's responsible for most of your successes over most of your career. So put some attention into that. Learn the secrets of sleeve lapel gripping, and you're going to find you start throwing a lot of people with Tomoe-nage. My goal is to turn you into someone who specializes in Yoko Tomoe-nage, who can throw anyone, anytime, any place. If they got a gi on, you can throw. A big part of that means you have to be able to throw left-handers and right-handers. So far, the majority of what we've seen has been right versus right, because most people are right-handed. But there's going to come days you come up against a guy who's either left-handed or he just happens to fight left-handed, and you got to be able to throw him as well. Throwing Kenkyotsu is a little bit different. Not completely different, but it is a little bit different because there's a different distance involved. If we're right versus right, the distance between us is quite small, and the space is also pretty small. So typically what we have to do is square the man up, either by pulling or by threatening the lead leg and making him step away. Okay, but the distance between us and the distance I have to move is quite small. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, what is the distance? What is the right distance for Tomoe-nage? Okay, well, it's generally located at what we call the pyramid position. Stand facing the camera. The pyramid position, imagine a straight line that joins my training partner's ankles and a triangle that comes out of that base and culminates somewhere here in front of my training partner. So this will be the apex of the triangle, like so, okay? Most of the time, I want to have my lead foot somewhere close to that apex of the pyramid. When we're right versus right, the pyramid, you more or less start at the apex of the pyramid. So your movement is very small, okay? Just a small movement, I'm ready to throw. But when we go left versus right, now the apex of the pyramid is in front of me, some distance away. And that requires me to step quite a long way to get to the apex of the pyramid. Okay? So the distance you must traverse is different. In addition, the blocking leg is different. In Iotsu, the blocking leg is this one. And it gets in my way, make a strong body. When I try to put my foot on, it's kind of in my way. But if I make it move back, now it's not in my way. Now I can get my foot onto his hip. In Kenkiyotsu, this is the blocking leg. And when he has the hip forward, it's in my way. So I need to make it go out of the way and create the space I need to throw. So the blocking leg is different, and the location of the apex of the pyramid is further away. Those are the main differences. Now, what does this mean for you when it's time to actually just throw somebody? It means you got to start getting good at a big cross step. It also means you have to master the idea of a step east, throw west. Okay? What does that mean? Kenkiyotsu situation. We come out, he gets a grip on me. I'm going to show it from the inferior grip. Most people believe this is an inferior grip. It's inferior for many forms of throw in a forwards direction, but it's not inferior for tomoe-nage. Okay? From here, the apex of the pyramid is all the way out here, strong resistant body. I'm going to step across to the apex of the pyramid. I am currently facing to the east. I pivot and I fall and throw facing out to the west. Okay? So do you see what happens? In the Kenkiyotsu throw, I have to take a big cross step and I have to turn 180 degrees and pivot to get a perfect throw. So throwing from the Kenkiyotsu situation is a little different, but it's not that hard. You'll learn it pretty quickly. Okay? So from a situation where we're opposite stance, I come in over the top, I go through, I take the preferred undergrip, and we're ready to throw. I need to take a big first step, a cross step that goes across in front of my training partner. I'm currently facing east, then I make my falling step, and I turn all the way around. And as a result, we're in perfect position to get our man throwing over the top. I'm just going to demonstrate the east-west thing. Strong body, face camera. So I start facing this way. Then I turn the opposite way. And that turn of 180 degrees is what plants my foot successfully and gets my opponent's head, you guessed it, over my head. So, left versus right, he comes out to make a grip. I go through, I make my grip. I want the second hand. As we go head to head with each other, he withdraws the hand from me, makes it hard. We're playing. From here I fake a grip, he takes his grip, I go through and take the grip I really wanted. Now we start to generate movement, like so. I take my big cross step across. I'm facing to the east, and then from here, we end up with a nice throw facing to the west. Okay? So this is how we throw in the Kenkiyotsu situation. You're going to notice the main differences with Iotsu. You need a big step across to get to the pyramid position. And you need to start facing one direction and pivot as you enter the throw. Okay? Probably, I'm going to throw this in as a side note. When I first start teaching tomoe-nage to someone, this is the most common mistake I see. A guy on his first day with tomoe-nage. We're just going to write this right. They stand here and they put the foot on first and they crash into the ground with a stiff back, and it's just a disaster. Okay? That, you're not going to throw anyone with that. Not anyone under the age of 90. Okay? You need to get into your crouch before you place the foot. Don't place the foot first. Perhaps I should have made this into a separate section because it's pretty important. When you first see jiu-jitsu guys learn tomoe-nage, it looks like a disaster because they all try to place the foot first. They do this. And then they try to say, this is terrible. Look how far I have to fall. It's going to be a disaster. I got a hip replacement. I could break my hip doing this. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to step and crouch so that I'm already low to the ground. And as I'm low to the ground, that's when you can take people through. But you'll notice I go into the ball and crouch prior to the placement of the foot. Don't go foot first. Don't be that guy. Okay? No one wants to do this kind of thing. They come out stiff, plant the foot, and it's just a disaster. Okay? Get used to the idea. We'll go around left versus right. Get used to the idea that when I go across my training partner, I step and I go into that low ball. Okay, so that as I sit and fall, we're in perfect position to throw. Okay? Commit down first and get underneath your opponent's arms. One of the last things to occur is the placement of your foot. You'll notice that I actually turn and pivot before the throwing foot even makes contact, so that I'm not going to place my throwing foot this time. Okay. From here, when I go through, I'm already in this position before my foot even makes contact, so that when it's time to throw someone for real, you're going to go underneath their strong resisting arms and fall into the ball shape that's required. I face to the west, then I turn and throw to the east. At least face the east to make the throw work. Okay? Good stuff.